Imagine the storm of a lifetime: lightning flashing, rain pouring like shards of glass from the heavens. A billionaire CEO rushes from his luxury car, his tailored suit soaked to the bone. His eyes fall upon a shivering figure on the sidewalk. A woman clutching a crying baby, both drenched and trembling in the cold. Why are they out here, he wonders. But as he steps closer, something inside him shifts. A pulse of recognition, a storm far greater than the one outside brewing deep within his soul. What happens when the man who has everything risks it all for the one thing money can't buy: humanity? Stay with us as this heart-stopping story of compassion, power, and dangerous secrets unfolds in ways you'll never see coming. The night was an unforgiving storm. Rain poured from the heavens like the sky had split open, each drop slamming against the pavement with a relentless rhythm. Wind howled through the narrow city streets, bending signs and rattling windows. Underneath the flickering glow of a malfunctioning streetlight, a lone figure sat huddled, clutching something tightly to her chest. She was soaked to the bone, her tattered clothes clinging to her fragile frame. Her eyes, sunken and desperate, darted around the street like a hunted animal, searching for safety. She held a baby in her arms. Its soft cries barely broke through the cacophony of the storm, but the sound carried a kind of sorrow that could pierce through the most hardened heart. The mother's trembling hands tried to shield her child from the freezing rain with a thin, torn scarf. Her fingers were pale, her knuckles raw and red. Every movement seemed slow, weighed down by fatigue and hunger. She shivered violently, her lips blue as she whispered soothing words to the infant, her voice shaking. Across the street, headlights pierced through the rain. A sleek, black luxury car rolled to a stop. Inside sat Michael Drayton, the billionaire CEO, known for his ruthless business acumen and icy demeanor. His tailored suit was immaculate, his wrist adorned with a watch that cost more than most people made in a year. His eyes, sharp and calculating, glanced out of the window as his chauffeur maneuvered the car slowly through the storm. Michael had just wrapped up a high-stakes merger, the kind of deal that would dominate headlines for weeks. His mind buzzed with thoughts of profits, stock prices, and power plays. The rain hammered against the roof of his car, but it was the image outside that gripped his attention. The woman, the baby, the storm. For a fleeting moment, he felt something stir within him, a memory, perhaps, of darker times when life wasn't as polished and perfect. He clenched his jaw and forced the thought away. "Drive on," he ordered, his voice cold. The car inched forward, but as it did, the woman shifted her position. Her eyes met Michael's for a brief second, a gaze so raw with despair it seemed to crack the veneer of his indifference. Her lips moved silently as though begging without words. The baby squirmed in her arms, its small hand reaching into the rain, grasping at nothing. Michael's breath hitched, his heart, a muscle he'd long believed to be made of stone, beat a little faster. He shook his head, annoyed at his own hesitation. He was a man of logic, of control. His empire was built on calculated decisions, not impulsive acts of kindness, sir. The driver asked, waiting for further instruction. Michael exhaled, sharply. "Stop." The car halted. Rain cascaded down the windows, blurring the world outside into a watery painting of misery. Michael's hand hovered over the door handle, his mind waging war with itself. Every fiber of his being screamed to look away, to keep moving. This was not his problem. People like her would only drag him down. But something about her refused to be ignored. He stepped out into the storm. The rain was ice against his skin, drenching his tailored clothes in seconds. The wind tore at his coat, but he moved forward, each step heavy with unspoken questions. The woman flinched as he approached, her eyes widening with a mix of fear and hope. She clutched the baby tighter, her arms a shield of desperation. "Who are you?" Michael asked, his voice cutting through the storm like a blade. The woman's lips trembled as she tried to form words. "Please, the baby let out a sharp, piercing cry. Michael's eyes dropped to the child, a tiny, fragile life caught in the claws of a merciless world. His heart clenched painfully. He took a slow breath, feeling the weight of a choice that could not be undone. Without another word, he reached into his pocket, pulling out a set of keys. He knelt down, his gaze steady and unreadable. The rain poured around them, a curtain of chaos, but his voice was calm and firm. "Take these." The woman stared at him, her breath hitching in disbelief. "What, the keys to my house?" Michael said, holding them out. "There's a place to stay, food, warmth, go there." Now, her hands, shaking, reached out as though afraid the offer would vanish if she moved too quickly. Her fingers brushed against his as she took the keys, the touch sending a jolt of humanity through him that he hadn't felt in years. Tears mixed with rain on her face as she whispered, "Why?" Michael's jaw tightened. He didn't have an answer he could put into words. He only knew that walking away wasn't an option anymore. "Go," he repeated. As she stood, cradling the baby, her eyes never leaving his, the storm seemed to relent just a little. She turned, her steps hurried but unsteady, disappearing into the shadows with the keys that had just changed both of their lives forever. Michael stood alone in the rain, his heart pounding, the cold biting into his skin. He didn't know what he had just done, but for the first time in a very long time, he felt alive. The storm subsided into a steady drizzle by the time Michael Drayton returned to his sprawling mansion. The vast estate, with its towering glass walls and cold marble floors, stood silent and empty, an ironic reflection of the man who owned it. He closed the door behind him, but the rain seemed to follow, its pattering against the windows a relentless reminder of the night's encounter. He tossed his drenched coat onto a chair and loosened his tie, but his mind wasn't focused on the comforts of home. Images of the woman and her baby lingered like ghostly imprints on his thoughts. Her hollow eyes, her shaking hands, and the child's fragile form gnawed at his resolve. He poured himself a glass of scotch, the amber liquid catching the dim light, and stared into its depths as though it held answers to the questions swirling within him. Why had he given her the keys? He had built an empire on precision and control, never acting without strategy. Yet tonight, in a single impulsive act, he had shattered his own rules. A part of him felt foolish, reckless even, but there was something else to a spark, a need to understand. He sat by the fire, its warmth doing little to ease the chill in his bones. His thoughts churned like a restless sea until a noise from the hall pulled him back to the present. Michael's pulse quickened. He wasn't expecting anyone. The footsteps grew louder, hesitant yet deliberate. Shadows danced on the walls as someone approached. He rose from his seat, the scotch forgotten, every sense on high alert. "Who's there?" he called, his voice sharp, commanding. A figure emerged from the shadows, a woman, her clothes still damp, her hair clinging to her face, but now standing in the grandeur of his home. She looked more vulnerable than ever. The baby was bundled against her chest, its tiny form almost hidden beneath the folds of a borrowed blanket. Michael's eyes narrowed. "How did you get in here?" She clutched the keys he had given her, holding them out like proof of her right to be there. "You told me to come," he inhaled sharply. Of course, he had offered the sanctuary himself, yet seeing her here, a stark contrast to the luxury surrounding them, felt jarring. His world and hers were galaxies apart, yet tonight, fate had thrown them together. "What's your name?" he asked, his tone softer but still guarded. She hesitated, her eyes flitting around the room as though weighing whether to trust him. "Emma," she whispered. Michael nodded slowly. "And the child?" "Lily, my daughter." Her voice cracked with emotion, and her gaze fell, There was a heavy silence, filled only by the crackling of the fire and the soft breathing of the baby. Michael studied her, noting the weariness etched into her face and the desperation that still clung to her like a second skin. "Why were you out there in the rain?" he asked, each word deliberate, piercing, with the baby alone. Emma's breath caught, and her grip on Lily tightened. She took a step back, her eyes filled with shadows of secrets. "I had no choice." Michael's expression darkened. "Everyone has a choice, not me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. His patience thinned, frustration bubbling beneath his calm exterior. "Then explain it. What are you running from?" She flinched at the word running. Her eyes darted to the window as though expecting danger to burst through at any moment. I can't say." Michael's jaw clenched. He had offered her shelter, but this wasn't a game. He wasn't a man who tolerated lies or half-truths. "You came into my home, accepted my help. If you want to stay, you'll tell me everything." Tears welled in her eyes, and she shook her head. "I didn't ask for your charity." "No," he said, his voice cutting. "But you needed it." The words hung heavy between them. Emma's shoulders sagged, her strength unraveling like thread pulled too tight. She sank into a nearby chair, her body trembling with exhaustion and fear. The baby stirred, letting out a soft whimper, and she gently rocked her. Michael watched, his heart a war zone of conflicting emotions. He wasn't a savior, wasn't a man who played hero. Yet something about Emma's fragility, her defiance, her fight to protect the child, stirred something in him he couldn't ignore. After a long pause, he spoke again, his voice gentler. "You're safe here, for now, but I need to know who's after you." Her eyes snapped up, wide with panic. "No one." "You're lying." "I'm not." He leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "People don't end up on the streets in the middle of a storm with a baby unless they're desperate or in danger. So, which is it?" Emma bit her lip, her whole body trembling, as if the truth were a storm building inside her. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "There's someone, he's dangerous. He wants Lily." Michael's blood ran cold. "Why?" She shook her head furiously, tears streaming down her face. "I can't say more. I can't put you in danger too. I'm already involved," he said, his voice a low growl. "Now tell me who he is." Emma sobbed, clutching the baby, as though her life depended on it. "A man who doesn't stop. He takes what he wants. And he won't stop until he has her." Michael's fists clenched at his sides. He could feel the weight of her terror, the noose tightening around her neck. But now, it wasn't just her fight. It was his. The storm outside began to rage anew, but inside the mansion, another storm was just beginning to brew. The rain lashed against the glass walls of Michael's mansion like a relentless whisper of unseen dangers. Every droplet seemed to echo a warning, each clap of thunder a reminder that the storm outside was nothing compared to the one brewing within. In the dim light, Michael paced the room, his mind a swirling tempest of questions, doubts, and a growing sense of dread. Emma sat hunched on the sofa, clutching Lily to her chest as though the child was her last tether to hope. The fire crackled, casting flickering shadows that danced like phantoms across the walls. Despite the warmth, a chill hung in the air, a chill born not of temperature, but of fear and unspoken truths. Michael stopped abruptly, his eyes fixed on Emma. "You said he's dangerous. A man who won't stop. Tell me his name." Her lips trembled, her eyes filled with a terror so raw it seemed to bleed into the room. "I can't. I already said too much." "You'll say more." His voice was still, sharp and cold. "If you want my protection, I need to know who we're up against." Emma shook her head furiously, her breathing ragged. "You don't understand. He's powerful. He has people everywhere." A sudden noise shattered her words aloud. metallic clank from the back of the house. Michael spun toward the sound, his heart thudding like a war drum. Emma gasped, clutching Lily tighter. What was that? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Michael didn't answer. His eyes narrowed, every muscle in his body tensing. He moved silently across the room, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. Years of corporate battles had honed his instincts, but this was different. This was primal, life and death. Another sound followed closer this time, a slow, deliberate creak, as if someone was testing the boundaries of his home. Michael reached a side cabinet and pulled open a drawer. His fingers closed around cold metal, a sleek, black handgun. He hadn't used it in years, but tonight it felt like an extension of his arm. He turned to Emma, his expression dark and unyielding. "Stay here, don't move, don't make a sound." Her eyes widened in horror. "Michael, no please." "Quiet." The single word was a command, brooking no argument. With the gun gripped firmly in his hand, Michael moved toward the hallway. The shadows seemed to deepen as he advanced, each step a heartbeat in the silence. The storm outside howled, wind rattling the windows, as though the very elements were conspiring with unseen forces. He reached the corner and peered around it. The hallway stretched ahead, dark and empty, but he knew better than to trust appearances. His fingers tightened on the trigger as he moved forward, his eyes scanning every corner, every doorway. Michael whipped around, aiming into the darkness. "Show yourself." Nothing, only the steady drip of rainwater pooling somewhere unseen. His pulse thundered in his ears as he stepped further into the unknown. The kitchen lay just ahead, its sleek, modern lines now cloaked in ominous shadows. He edged closer, his breath shallow and controlled. Suddenly, a figure lunged from the darkness. Michael reacted instinctively. The gun came up, but a hand shot out, knocking it aside. The weapon clattered to the floor as he grappled with the intruder. The two figures collided in a fierce struggle, bodies slamming against the kitchen island with a bone-rattling crash. Michael fought with a ferocity he hadn't known he possessed, driven by a need to protect more than just himself. His fist connected with flesh, a sharp grunt of pain, but the attacker was strong, relentless. "Who are you?" Michael growled, his teeth clenched. The intruder said nothing, only hissed like a predator denied its prey. A gloved hand reached for something, a blade. The glint of steel caught the firelight for a split second before it slashed through the air. Michael twisted, the knife grazing his side instead of plunging deep. Pain seared through him, but he gritted his teeth and seized the man's wrist, twisting it until the blade clattered to the floor. "Why are you here?" he roared, slamming the intruder against the counter. The man snarled, his eyes wild with fury. For a brief moment, Michael caught a glimpse of something chilling, eyes that burned with soulless determination. This wasn't just a thief or a drifter, this was someone with a mission. The realization hit him like a thunderclap. He's here for Emma, for the baby. With a surge of adrenaline, Michael drove his shoulder into the man's chest, knocking him backward. The intruder stumbled, lost his footing, and fell hard, but he didn't stay down. In a blur of movement, the man scrambled to his feet and dashed for the back door. Michael lunged after him, his hand brushing the edge of a jacket. But the figure slipped away into the night. The door slammed shut. Michael stood there, panting, his heart a hammer against his ribs. Rain poured in through the open doorway, pooling on the floor like blood. He retrieved the gun, his fingers trembling as he picked it up. He turned back toward the living room, where Emma sat frozen, her face pale as death itself. "Who was that?" Michael demanded, his voice sharp as broken glass. She shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. I told you he would find me." "Who is he?" Her lips quivered, her gaze darting to the baby in her arms. "He's not a man, he's a monster," Michael's eyes burned with a fury he hadn't felt in years. And now he's my monster to deal with. The storm raged on, relentless as the pounding in Michael's chest. He stood in the living room, the gun still in his hand, the shadows twisting and bending around him like a dark, living thing. His eyes burned into Emma's, demanding answers, but her gaze was lost, trapped somewhere far away where memories became nightmares. Emma, Michael's voice was low, a whisper of thunder, you need to tell me everything now. She cradled Lily closer, her trembling fingers brushing the baby's damp curls. Her breath was shallow, her entire body rigid with terror. It started a long time ago. Before I had Lily, before I met you. Michael narrowed his eyes. Before, what does that mean? Who is he? Emma closed her eyes, as if trying to shut out the truth. But it was too late. The truth was a storm that couldn't be stopped. Every instinct screamed to pull the trigger, but something held him back, a sickening realization that Vincent wasn't bluffing. I said, "Get out." A tense silence stretched, thick as smoke. Then, with a sudden burst of violence, Vincent lunged. The gun went off. The sharp crack of the gunshot echoed through the house like a thunderclap, drowning out the storm outside. Michael's heart froze as he watched Vincent recoil from the force of the bullet, but instead of falling, Vincent merely staggered, a twisted grin spreading across his face. You missed, he whispered darkly, a cold, mocking chuckle escaping his lips. Emma screamed, clutching Lily tighter as the baby cried out in fear. The air was suffocating, charged with a tension so thick it felt like the walls themselves would crack under its weight. Michael's hand trembled, his knuckles white, as he tightened his grip on the gun. Stay back, he barked, his voice raw with desperation and fury, but Vincent was unfazed. He took another step forward, his eyes gleaming with predatory malice. The dark coat he wore flared like the wings of a vulture, swallowing the light as he advanced. You think you can protect them, he hissed. You have no idea what you're dealing with. I'll stop you, Michael growled through clenched teeth. His finger hovered over the trigger again, but his mind was racing with doubts. Vincent wasn't just a man, he was a force of manipulation, cruelty, and power. Shooting him once hadn't worked. What would it take to end this nightmare? Vincent raised a hand, palm outward in a gesture of twisted amusement. Do you know why I'm not afraid? Because I've already won, people like you. You think money and power mean control, but control isn't in what you own. His voice dropped, venomous and slow. It's in what you fear. The words hit Michael like a blow to the chest. Fear. That's what Vincent had fed on Emma's fear, his own fear. The terror that coursed through their lives like poison. His vision blurred for a second, but he steadied himself, breathing in deeply as the storm roared louder outside. No, not this time. You don't control us, Michael spat, the fury building in his chest like a wildfire. You are nothing but a coward hiding behind threats. Vincent's smirk wavered, just for a heartbeat, but it was enough. Michael felt it a shift in the power. His pulse quickened, determination flooding his veins. Emma's voice broke through the chaos, sharp and trembling. He's lying, Michael. Everything he's ever done has been built on lies. She stepped forward, her eyes blazing with newfound strength. You're not invincible, Vincent. You never were. Vincent's gaze snapped to Emma, his composure cracking as rage contorted his features. You think you can defy me? He snarled. You belong to me. You'll always belong to me. No, Emma whispered, her voice steady. I don't. I never did. Michael seized the moment. He lunged, grabbing Vincent by the collar and slamming him against the wall. The gun clattered to the floor between them, forgotten in the surge of raw emotion. The two men grappled, the room filling with the sound of their struggle, the crash of furniture, the splintering of wood. Vincent fought like a man possessed, his strength unnatural, fueled by fury and obsession. But Michael wasn't the same man he had been when this night began. He wasn't just fighting for himself, he was fighting for Emma, for Lily, for the life they deserved. The storm outside reached its peak, lightning flashing through the windows and casting jagged shadows across their faces. Michael slammed Vincent down, pinning him with every ounce of strength he had. Their eyes locked, a battle of wills as fierce as the storm. "This ends now," Michael hissed. Vincent sneered, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. "You can't kill me. You don't have it in you." Michael's hand tightened around Vincent's throat. His mind raced, the weight of the moment crushing down on him. He could end it right here, right now. But what kind of man would he become if he gave in to that darkness? He thought of Emma, of Lily, of the future they could have if they escaped this nightmare. The choice was his. Suddenly, Emma appeared at his side. She placed a trembling hand on Michael's arm. "Let him go," she whispered. "Don't become like him." Her words pierced through the storm of his rage. Slowly, painfully, Michael released his grip. He rose, breathing heavily, his heart hammering against his ribs. Vincent coughed and sputtered, his eyes wide with disbelief. You'll regret this." Michael stood tall, his voice steady and cold. "No, you will." Police sirens wailed in the distance, drawing closer. The storm outside began to ease, the thunder rolling into the distance. Emma's hand found Michael's, her fingers lacing through his as they stood together. "I'm not afraid anymore," she whispered. Michael squeezed her hand, a fierce protectiveness filling his heart. "Neither am I." Vincent, weakened and defeated, slumped against the wall as the flashing blue lights filled the windows. The door burst open, and uniformed officers flooded in, their weapons drawn. The nightmare was over. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was silence, and in that silence, hope began too.